and welcome to the Content 10X podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and I am joined once again by our co-host, Hayley, who heads up marketing operations and client account management at Content 10X. Hayley, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me on again. I'm really excited for this one.
Absolutely, me too. So this is the fifth and final part of our expert interview series. So I hope you've been finding these episodes really useful because at Content 10X we're so passionate about interviewing the experts within your organisation and then turning those interviews into thought leadership content. So we just think it's a really, really smart approach, which is why we've been going so deep into this in the last episodes. On the podcast, we've been running a series, so episodes 324 to 327, the last 4 episodes, available on all the apps and YouTube, are all about expert interviews. So in the first one, we talk about why we think expert interviews in your company can be the perfect approach for creating a variety of undifferentiated thought leadership content. The second episode, we go into tackling how to prepare. So preparation is everything. So all the planning and preparation. Then in the third, we talked about how to actually run the interview. So the tech, the setup, the fear that you may have in the run-in. And then in the fourth, the icing on the cake, really important. So turning the interview into content and all the repurposing and the repurposing opportunities. So, we promised this is a 5-part series, and this is the fifth part of the series, the fifth and final, and we're answering some of your FAQs. So we've been inviting questions as we go along. So thank you so much for sending the questions over. And we've managed to put together some of the main questions and gather some of the key themes. And we're going to go through those in this episode to really just help you with thought leadership content through interviewing experts and then turning that into great content. So going through the questions, Hayley, where do you want to start? Let's start where you want to start with these questions.
Brilliant. Yeah, we've had some really, really great questions. So let's start with how long and how often. So the first question that we had in was how long should the interview be? So for an expert interview, you can really have anything between kind of a really short, snappy expert interview, 15, 20 minutes or so, through to a longer one, so maybe an hour. Really don't go over an hour though, just think of kind of how we all behave. All of our energy dwindles, kind of 45 minutes, we just kind of start to kind of top out. An hour at most, we really want to kind of be calling a day on those expert interviews. But it really kind of all comes down to the content output, which is all in the upfront planning. So have a look through and exactly decide how much time that you need to be dedicating to it. If it's a really in-depth conversation and discussion, you're going to need an hour. If the content output is going to be shorter, then it's just going to be about 15 or 20 minutes. So really focus on that strategic point of view. And then how often do I do interviews? I guess, Amy, how long is a piece of string? But again, this is really down to the strategy of it all. How much time do you have to dedicate to it? If it's for a new podcast or a video series, something that you're going to maintain momentum on, consistency is hugely key in any organic social content, in any content at all. So I would be mapping out with the key members of your team how often that you want to be doing it and how often you can commit to it. So whether it's an hour interview every month is a great start. Ideally, we'd like to be seeing something that's bi-weekly or even weekly that you could be turning into a podcast. But it really depends on the amount of time that you guys have to do it. But also don't forget, quite often there's a misconception that one interview is one podcast episode, and it's not. So plan it out, and you can be really, really smart and have an hour's conversation and separate it into 2 episodes, or maybe even a series of 4 or longer. So have a look and see what content that you can get from one of your interviews and then go from there, really. Amy, over to you. What's our next question?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said there, Hayley. And I think they play into each other, don't they? The answer to the how long and how often, because if you do settle on the shorter ones and you're going to try and get 15 to 20 minutes of people's time, then looking at what you want to create from that and the plan, maybe then you are going to be like weekly with shorter ones, but then you decide to do a bigger one, like an hour one, and then that could be monthly. So they kind of play into each other as well, don't they? So tricky
Absolutely.
question, but well answered.
And also, it's a difficult one as well, because it really depends on the commitment from the rest of the team. You guys in marketing, I know we often have really some great ideas and some phenomenal ideas of who we want on it. And then when we actually go out to the team, they're booked up for months in advance. So it really just depends as a team as a whole what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So another question that we had was how can the expert interviews complement my other marketing strategies? So I think we've already just touched on this, but if you're going to be looking at the year ahead and your objective for your overall content marketing strategy, and you are planning on interviewing experts for the thought leadership component, then, you clearly want to make sure there's alignment with that year ahead strategy. So if you, for example, decided on some particular pillars that you want to focus on, that you want to become known for in your industry, then I think that's when you start addressing the who side of the interviews then, isn't it? So who in the organisation are the experts for those pillars that, as part of our bigger strategy, we want to become known for and we want to create thought leadership for. So it's recognising the expertise and then lining that up with your ultimate objectives. And we've mentioned earlier in the previous episodes in the series about speaking to people who are functional experts, industry experts, not just, the C-suite and the top leadership, but, this expertise, it exists throughout the organisation. But and the question, complementing other marketing strategies and lining things together, you need to make sure that you're aligning with your channel strategy as well. So the pillars and the who and the expertise to align with what you want to be known for. And then what are the key channels? So that's another clear part of your overall marketing strategy too, isn't it? We want to mainly focus on, say, webinars and LinkedIn, or we want to mainly focus on YouTube lives and Instagram content or whatever it may be. So B2B is usually more kind of the webinars and the reports and white papers with LinkedIn. But, if you've got to work back as well, I think. So how are we going to show up on this platform in particular, LinkedIn, and what kind of content do we want to show up with? So now let's align that with the approach for our expert interviews too, because coming back to the planning, the types of content for that platform that you want to create. And so how can we extract that from the interviews that we're going to run? So, I guess kind of a bit of a long answer there and quite a bit to think about, but we keep saying it, but the planning and the prep is everything, and it has to build up to the overall strategy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And also how you can amplify your content marketing strategies as well. So I'm just thinking of so many clients that we know who have brilliant industry events. And, we've just spoken about how long and how often. If you've got key clients that are literally all there in one day, amplify it. Can you grab all of those people for 15, 20 minutes each? And then you've got a huge content strategy. If you think about it, you've probably got maybe 10 or 12 people that you could pull on quite easily. And that's a huge content platform for you there. So try and think of it not just complementing, as Amy's mentioned, but also how you can amplify those events, those conferences that you've already got. You've already got those people in the same room. So what can you do with their time whilst they're there to make it as strong as possible?
Yeah, absolutely, completely. Moving on to these other questions. So absolutely perfect for you to answer, Hayley, because there's a few questions we've had about the interviews and the storytelling and things like that. Then the next one being, what if the expert goes off topic or starts providing some technical information, things like that? So how do you manage that, Hayley, when they start to go off topic?
I absolutely love when they go off topic. So it's so important. I know, as sometimes as a facilitator or an interviewer, you might kind of think, alarm bells are ringing. They've gone off on a complete tangent. Please let them go off topic. They are clearly passionate about what they're talking about. They've gone off on a tangent. Just let them flow. Let them just get it all out, have that kind of flow of conversation, because that's what editing is about. If it's not necessary and doesn't need to be included, you can edit it out afterwards. But quite often, these key, really exciting nuggets of information and passion come out in their complete tangents that they go off on. So let them. Definitely, please don't stop them midway through. Quite often, if you stop somebody, they immediately become flustered, really conscious of what they're talking about, trying to overthink what they're discussing. And we really don't want that to happen. Like, the whole point of these interviews is to have this calm, relaxed flow nature. So let them do it. Just guide them back to the conversation. And it can be obviously tempting to interrupt, but use this point to take notes as an interviewer or a facilitator on something that clearly can be discussed at another point as well. And then we've got a really great one about how do you balance structured questions as well as keeping the storytelling flowing? So yeah, that's a really good question. But I guess firstly, because you've done the preparation up front, you've come prepared as an interviewer with the stories and the points that you want to cover. And then you've given the guest, your expert, all of the questions for them to understand and look through and create their stories. You should really have a storytelling flow before you've even started the interview itself. So you should be able to, as an interviewer or a facilitator, look through and maybe just rearrange those points of conversation so it flows like a story. But one thing I would say is don't get straight into the story. Build it up. So you want to have time with your expert to really kind of warm them up and do the kind of upfront questions and then get into the story. And at that point, please ask open-ended questions. To get a story out, you need to continuously ask open-ended questions. Closed ones will just force everybody kind of down like a very narrow path. But as you're the interviewer, it's important for you to be listening to the answers of the questions. So don't just focus on, here's the script, here are the points that we need to cover, I'm just going to get on to the next question. Listen to what that expert is saying and then guide that conversation, because quite often their answer might be elongated, off tangent, but provide great content. So ask them further questions and really, really go into the flow of it. So have a mix of structured questions at the start, getting into the flow, and then closing questions at the end. What do you think, Amy?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer, and I completely agree with you. And I like how they link together as well, because when we were talking in the first section about going off topic and, you know, kind of lean into that and let them, and you can bring things back, but that can still be content. And then thinking here about the storytelling side as well, it just brings me to thinking about the whole, don't discard like the offcuts and the, you know, like the content that maybe wasn't part of the plan. So I was just going to mention that, for example, when we record our B2B Content Strategies podcast, so if you haven't checked that out, go check that out. It's our sister podcast to the Content 10X podcast, where we interview leaders in B2B content marketing. And, you know, we're always aware of that in terms of we know what we're asking these experts. We've practiced what we preach. We've shared the questions in advance. And we know what content we want to create from those episodes. But when we're going through our edit, we have what we call the content bank as well. So we pick out those moments where it wasn't part of the original plan, but as you said, Hayley, like stories that have come about that we might not be expecting, or certain segues, or kind of going slightly off topic, but it's still really interesting in its content in itself. And yes, it's not part of our current plan, like the plan of what's going to go out on different platforms for that episode, but it's not going to go to waste because it goes in our bank, and then we theme the content within the bank. And what do we have there? We have some highlights episodes, we have future content. And in larger organisations, you know, they might have said something wonderful for the sales team, so you can get in touch with them and say, you know, we've got this excellent like video clip that you guys could be sharing as part of the sales process and things like that. So I love what you said, Hayley, about let them initially, like let them kind of go off topic. And you're absolutely right, you know, about getting those stories and the open-endedness and stuff. So hopefully, like, well, we've answered that question well, because it was really, really good question. Let's move on to the next questions. Move on to the content from the episode. So another great question. Well, I mean, this is a key question that we get asked a lot. How much content can you really generate? So you run in a recorded video expert interview, be it 15, 20 minutes, or be it longer, an hour or so. How much content could you really generate? And I feel like, I suppose the straightforward answer to that is, well, again, how long is a piece of string? Because there's so much that you can create. But there isn't a rule of thumb as well, because that does come back to your content strategy. We're not saying to lean into every platform and create every type of content just because you can. It still has to be a part of your strategy, and you might have a certain cap to how many posts you want to put out on certain platforms, how many blog posts you want to release on a weekly or monthly basis and things like that. So you're going to have to kind of fit in within what you've agreed is your approach and your strategy. But, easily from one expert interview, you should be able to create 15 or 20, pieces of content, because think about it from long form and short form as well. So there can be the long form content you've immediately got right there, a long form video, depending on how you're going to edit it. And then if you're leaning into the podcast side of things, you've got a long form podcast right there too. And then you've got a long form blog post. So let's face it, if you are going to talk about a couple of key insights or a couple of different topics, you might have a couple of blog posts and a couple of podcast episodes and a couple of videos that are all long form. And you might have infographics, some kind of long form visual content as well. And then, the short form, like we could be talking, pulling out key quotes for quote graphics, pulling out great little video snippets for short social media videos, designing in carousels, image carousels, things like that. And then even from a 15-minute interview, you should be at least able to get 6 or 7, really good short videos, or maybe 10, but you don't want to end up chopping up literally every single minute of the interview. So you're not going to chop it all up. But there's a lot, isn't there, Hayley? I think, it comes down to what your plan is, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, and it's also thinking about the kind of long form to short form to long form again. So if your strategy is actually ultimately right at the beginning, you guys come together and say, actually, I need to release an ebook. Well, hold on, we're going to do an ebook, but separated into 12 expert interviews, because I know I can embed, like a teaser within like an email newsletter on a monthly basis, and then look at the long-term nurture. Think of that as the strategy. So don't just think of long form to short form, think of the long form to short form back to long form.
Yeah.
Like, how can you really get the most out of this? Because we talk about that all the time, don't we, Amy? The most return on investment, that bang for your buck. We want to make sure that this is your long-term strategy and kind of a key content aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's the long form to longer form of bringing them all together and creating that ebook or that report or that big thought leadership piece as well. So there's so much. Next question. So I really love this, and Hayley and I are both going to provide a different answer for this, because it just based on our experiences and what stood out the most. But the question is, what mistakes do you see marketing teams make with expert interviews? So I'll share one, then Hayley's going to share one. And the one that immediately came to mind for me was trying to cover too much in one interview. So we want expert interviews really to go deep and narrow. This is thought leadership content. This is supposed to be kind of forward thinking, like deeper insights, and trying to create some differentiated, useful content. So sometimes what can happen is we're trying to cover so much in one episode, or I say episode, whatever it is, one piece of content, whatever that's going to go on to become. Whereas maybe it could be broken down much deeper, and then there can be more content to then create in the future. So let's not cover all of that. Let's go deep on this, and then let's book in a series, and let's cover more of this information as we go along in other interviews. So I think that is just one more for the planning phase. But if you try to cover too much, you then end up having quite a high level interview, and it doesn't then completely tick the box of actually going deeper into the expert's knowledge and insights and things like that. It still stays quite surface level if you're covering too much. So, one interview broken down could be 5 interviews that become 10 blog posts and that kind of thing. So, not going deep and narrow and trying to cover too much is probably one of the big mistakes that I see. What about you in terms of mistakes that you see with these expert interviews?
Yeah, just touching on the one that was raised with you, Amy, is that often when we have a kind of tendency of wanting to cover everything in an expert interview, but again, just to reiterate what Amy mentioned, but think of the end audience. Like, I liken it to ordering off of a menu. You just want to come away with like one really great meal, one kind of key piece of valuable information that you're going to share. You don't want to be delivered the entire menu on your table. I mean, some people might do, but majority of us would feel a little bit overwhelmed. You know, you'd kind of be going, well, what did you enjoy about it? Just give that person, like, think about that end audience user. They just want one piece, don't overwhelm them. And they'd be more happier with one piece of really deep, narrow expertise into you than just kind of surface level information. So really, really kind of focus on that bit. For me, I would definitely say the mistake that I see is being really formal in the interview itself. So yes, we work majority B2B, but we don't need to be formal. You know, I've mentioned it before, humans connect with humans. We don't connect with robots. We connect with warmth and nurturing. That's what content is all about. So, you know, let's make sure that we're breaking down those barriers within the interviews and not being overly formal. So we're really kind of driving that nurturing connection. And as I mentioned before, stopping the answers when they get to a good point. So letting people go off on tangents. I see that quite often, that, you know, there'll be a kind of overly structured way of holding the interview rather than letting the conversation flow naturally. And quite often you'll miss the golden opportunities, those key little nuggets of information that you wouldn't have got if you'd stopped it. So we've also had a question about distribution as well. So I think we could briefly touch on that. So what platforms are best for distribution? So yeah, this is a huge open-ended question and answer really as well. It really depends. So, I mean, we can start, you know, primarily LinkedIn, your website, industry platforms, podcast, YouTube, other social platforms too. But this just really comes down to you, your brand, and your audience. Like, where is your audience showing up? Because there's no right answer. Look across the board and really focus on the key platforms that you need to be present on. Don't spread yourself too thin. So, you know, if you don't need to be on TikTok, on X, on Blue Sky, on Reddit, on everything, choose your key platforms first and then get those right. And then when you're getting those right, step on to the next one, or you don't need to. So have a look, but most importantly, you know, look where your audience is, but do not spread yourself too thin. There's nothing worse than cutting content. Really, really focus on the right platforms.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And another very similar question that we got, how often should I reshare the content? So it's kind of a similar question, isn't it? Where should I be sharing it? What are the best distribution channels? And also, how often should I reshare it? And I really echo what you just said, Hayley, in terms of it's not about, you know, the volume play as well, of like just keep resharing the content. What I would say is that when we're creating this type of content, the beauty of it often is that it is evergreen, you know, unless it's content that is really, you know, timely to the moment, and you're talking about something that's been in the news or some kind of upcoming event and now the event's passed or something like that. Well, obviously that's very time specific. It's not really going to be evergreen, and you'll be aware of that, and you'll have to put that to bed because it doesn't resonate anymore. It's not useful anymore. But the content that is really great thought leadership content, that point, that video, that quote, that infographic, that blog post, it's just as relevant today as it was 6 months or a year ago, useful to your audience. You can reshare it, and you should reshare it. You can't expect everybody to have seen it the first time that you shared it. We wish our audiences were just hanging on to like waiting for us to put something out and they see everything that we produce, but they don't, do we? We're all busy. So you should never, ever, ever feel bad or about resharing content. You shouldn't feel like you're being repetitive, or, you know, that you're going to get called out and someone's going to say, well, didn't you share that 6 months ago? I mean, if people are doing that, rejoice in the fact that they care so much about what you do and notice that you shared it 6 months ago. So you should reshare. I'd say how often? Well, firstly, you know, I guess it comes back again to us saying about your content strategy and what you're planning to put out across different platforms, and then therefore looking at the horizon ahead to work out the appropriate times to reshare. And it might be more that you plan to keep revisiting certain pillars through different quarters and things like that. So if you had a particular topic with an expert that you put out in Q1, and the plan is that you're going to really cover that pillar in Q1, you're going to move on to some different pillars in Q2, Q3, but you're going to revisit in Q4, then you'll probably be thinking about resharing it further down the year at the right time. So it really does just depend on that, on your strategy, on your plan. Have that plan for the evergreen content of when you are going to reshare it. And also it might just be, again, a timely response. So you had an expert that shared some fantastic information about a particular topic, and then that's just become big news. Like someone else has been talking about it recently in the press or in your your industry, or there's a big event about it. That, obviously that's a great point to go back and reshare that content because it's still relevant and it's now a hot topic. So it does become quite timely. But, plan it all through. And also for us, I just mentioned earlier, in the Content 10X podcast, when we're creating the content very specifically for each episode that we planned on our channels, and we have that content bank, it's just always being aware of what's in that content bank and the content that you're going to create from it. And then having a plan for that, or at least revisiting it on maybe a monthly basis and just seeing what you have there to see if there's anything relevant coming up this month that you could go back to it as well. So it's resharing what you've published and resharing the content that you put aside for the right moment to actually publish out there for the first time as well. So there's quite a bit to consider, but the main thing is do not be shy in resharing, but just make sure it fits in with your pillars and your approach and the channel specific priorities that you have. Right, so the next questions we'll go through. We've got a couple of really important questions, I think, actually, to finish this off, because it all comes down to the so what of it all and the metrics. So Hayley, I'll let you take these. So the first of the two biggies that we got on this topic, this is always going to be asked. So what metrics should I track for this content?
And this is perfect because this actually plays into the resharing content too. So metrics that you need to be tracking for the content are website traffic, views, impressions, engagement, click-through rates, inquiries, email response. Anything that is related to these expert interviews, you need to be tracking for, and look across every single platform, but look specifically on measuring that impact of that interview. Now, what I really want you guys to look at is specifically the content that's worked and not worked as well. So when Amy's mentioning about how often should I be resharing, that also needs to be driving what content that you're resharing to. But don't just look at the content that's not worked too. Understand why it didn't work and whether you can reshare it again, but change the hook, change the creative. Like, why didn't it stop the scroll? We're really passionate about understanding what's stopping the scroll here. And so always look at how you can optimize that content when you reshare it. That's super important. So it's done well the first time around, how we can make it better, or it didn't do well, but this content is still really, really valuable. What can we do? And Amy's super right. A huge amount of your audience won't have seen this the first amount of time. That would require all of our audiences to be on all of our platforms at the same time of day, on the exact moment of posting. Quite often, we will miss a lot of content. And even if they're seeing it again, it's also reiterating that message that they need to hear. So whether it's 6 months down the line or a year down the line, it's still that message that they need to be resharing. So look at the value when it comes to resharing. Am I adding value or am I creating volume? Big difference. So look at those metrics, and that will really drive and guide you on how that content's performing, but don't let it be in the content graveyard. If that post didn't perform well, but still had really great value, what can we do to make it better next time? Maybe the hook was really weak. and it just didn't resonate. Maybe the time and the day wasn't correct. Maybe you've only just started posting on social and you're actually just testing where your audience is hanging out on what day. Maybe we need to make sure that it's posted on a certain time of day when we're reposting it again. Or maybe actually the creative wasn't strong enough. Maybe the power word call out or the font hierarchy could have been amplified better. Have a look at every single thing and really analyze it. We get into the nitty gritty. So track everything, look at what's moving it, making sure that you're prioritizing those first. Anything that's what performed well should be a priority. But if it's still adding value but didn't perform well, still post it again, but optimize it for the next one. Do you think, Amy?
Yeah, I was going to say in terms of when you were mentioning the metrics, so whatever the normal metrics would be for you for that type of content, if it's been turned into an email, well, what would you normally look for your email metrics, open rates, click-through rates, etc. If it's gone to be a blog post, what would you normally look at, your traffic and things like that? So it's looking at the metrics that already exist, like you said, Hayley. But something that I was going to mention as well is that I think metrics they're obviously so important because you want to measure things, you want to know how they perform, and as you were saying, Hayley, make some changes based on the numbers that you're seeing, and then measure those changes and the impact. But another thing that just came to mind as you were saying that, Hayley, was to run an expert interview program and get in front of all these different experts within the company, you got to get buy-in from the experts in the company, haven't you? And so I guess another part of the metrics too is if you can share with the people who you want to get on board and you want to get stakeholders involved and leadership involved and everyone behind it, if you can share the numbers of the reach that you are getting from these interviews, it's going to get more internal buy-in as well, isn't it? So I'm thinking about the holistic measurement. Let's say you record an expert interview and it goes on to the podcast and you also put it on your YouTube channel. Let's just assume that you've got podcasts and YouTube channel, and you also put out some LinkedIn content and blog posts. And then if you were to say the reach of that for a number, let's just get our number and say how many people did it reach. So you'd be getting the podcast download plus the YouTube views plus the website and visitors to blog posts plus the views or likes or engagement, whatever you want to track on social, and added it all together. Wouldn't it be great then to just be saying internally, that we're interviewing experts, and from, the first 3 interviews alone, we've got our in-house expertise in front of 50,000 people, because through the reach of that content, 50,000 people have heard us as a company and our experts talking about this topic. And so I feel like if you really nail it in order to improve and know what's working in industry marketing, alongside just knowing those numbers for the internal promotion and buy-in of the whole thing combined, it's really going to help, isn't it? So hugely. That data is important. hugely. And just off the back of that, I think also the fundamental aspect of it is that this is employee generated content, and use your employees, if they're happy, post it on LinkedIn and look at it from, when we're talking about upfront planning, be looking at those employees and looking at those LinkedIn followers. Does your employee actually have more followers than you do as a company on LinkedIn? Because we can promise you that you should be sharing that content directly from that employee's profile and resharing it as a company. You've got to think about the reach and impressions here of what's really going to kind of move the needle. And exactly as Amy was saying, across all those platforms, look at, the reach of it, but also across 12 of your employees, how many followers have they got? And, where are we, what else can we do to kind of leverage it? If you're planning on doing this and you're actually thinking, hold on, we've got a conference that's 6 months out that we could be doing it for, what can we be doing smartly ahead to prep it? Could we actually be reaching out to these experts and saying, hey, we're going to have an expert interview with you, and this is going to be a huge part of our content strategy, but as part of it, we'd like to see kind of some growth on your LinkedIn page because this is what we want to do. All of these things can be worked on upfront as well. Yeah, I completely agree. This leads on perfectly. So I think this is the last question that we'll tackle for the episode. Again, another classic. How long does it take to see results? So what would be your typical answer to that?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a question that we probably get asked on a weekly, if not day-to-day basis, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'd always love to see results like overnight success and everything else, but it's not, there's that kind of vanity metrics versus engagement metrics, and content marketing is not a short-term quick fix gain. It is not. It is a huge long-term gain. And that's the most important thing. Realistically, when we're speaking to clients and, you were starting to kind of really push on organic social, you're not going to see any results for at least 3 months. And that can be quite disheartening at the beginning to kind of put all of this upfront effort in and not see a lot of results for a long period of time. But it's super, super important for you guys to realize that it might take months and months for somebody behind the scenes to just continuously be nurtured. Amy mentions before, there's a huge amount of content that people need to be going through before we get to the kind of buying phase. So it's more about when they're ready to make that purchase, that your brand is on top of mind for them. And that's what you need to focus on, is just making sure that you've got the best nurturing content out there and you're looking further down the road. So don't look on a week-to-week basis, look on quarterly basis, and then adjust your strategy from there.
Yeah. And I think it is a mindset thing, isn't it, as well? You really do have to get into that patience and that long-term mindset. So yeah, like perfect answer. I think that's a wrap, isn't it? We could go on, like we could first of all, I think we need to wrap.
We could do like part 2, 3. Thank you.
I was going to say that we'll put links to in the show notes, we'll put links to some blog posts and podcast episodes that we've actually done on some of these topics specifically too. So we have done previously a podcast episode on the measurement and tracking of results and what to look for, so that we go into a little bit of detail in a specific episode on that. We've also done episodes on working out the best platforms for distribution. So we'll put links to slightly more longer form, deeper content that covers some of the questions that were asked here. But yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you've enjoyed us looking more deeply at this topic of expert interviews and that it's been really useful. So it's been a 5-part podcast series and we're wrapping that up now. But firstly, just to mention that the next episode is actually going to be a throwback episode where we're going to share with you an episode with Atlassian content writer Sarah Goff-Dupont, and she's an in-house expert who interviews people within the company to create content. It was a fantastic episode that we're going to share again next week because it's really on point with everything that we've been talking about in this series. We think you'll find it really, really useful. Also, we would love to know what you think about this format for us for the Content 10X podcast. So how did you find this series? What would you like to see more of? We want to dig deeper into different topics you want us to talk about. What would you like to learn more about? So please just give us feedback. We really welcome it. Just send that over to info@content10x.com. That's the same address if you would like to get in touch with us if you want help with your content too. So we're a content agency. We support with all of this. We can run expert interview process for you and create content from it, or all kinds of content services from strategy, creation and repurposing. So info@content10x.com to give us feedback on the content, but also if you would like support, then please do get in touch. And also we've been mentioning throughout the series that we've got this fantastic free download that you can get hold of. It's our impactful interview guide. So you can go to content10x.com/interview-guide. But if you listen to this or looking on YouTube, the link will be right with you in the show notes right now. So that's just a very straightforward, simple download, and it gives you a preparation checklist and guidance on how to deliver the messages successfully. All the kind of tech that you might be worried about, there's some tech recommendations and tips. So if you're going to be interviewing people, this is going to be a great guide to share with the people that you interview. And if you are the person being interviewed, you're going to find it super useful to make sure that you deliver a really fantastic interview and you manage to get all your points across and you have no tech mishaps. So go and get our impactful interview guide. Otherwise, Hayley, I think that's a wrap, isn't it? Thank you so much for co-hosting this series, and I look forward to us doing more content like this as well.
Me too. Thank you so much for having us. It's been really, really great fun, and I'm looking forward to the next one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Right. Well, all that's left to say is thank you so much for joining Hayley and I in this episode, and we'll catch you in the next one.